Good evening, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I hate to be a Debbie Downer, ladies and gentlemen, but I am a little bit under the weather, just a tad bit. So we're going to not be as hyped up during the forecast tonight, so please bear with me on that. However, that doesn't mean that I'm not excited, because there's quite a bit I want to go over with you as far as the United States HDD and CDD forecast is concerned. Much of this discussion tonight is going to be also clearing up and maybe providing some additional clarification on some of the products that I go over with all of you. Because I think context matters, especially when we're talking about weather products. And one of the things that in meteorology we struggle with a lot is communication, right? It's one of the biggest challenges that we have. And, you would think that we would have mastered it by now, but you'd be surprised. There's a whole diatribe I can go on about how, for example, things like tornado warnings, it's really the cry of wolf syndrome. Anytime a siren goes off for a tornado warning in an area that hasn't seen tornadoes, or people that haven't seen it in their lifetimes, they're not going to take it as seriously versus somebody that has experienced a catastrophe like a tornado. So it's that communication of which that meteorologists continue to struggle with today. And that's where I come in too, because part of the equation with WX Rogue, and part of the reason why I'm here, is to help broaden the understanding of the weather products that are specific and relative to energy and commodity trading. And eventually, of course, agriculture. More on that a little bit later on. So tonight, we're going to cover a couple of those, I guess, gray areas in weather, especially as it relates to what we talk about here on the channel, as well as at Energy Rogue, and also talk about the latest on our forecast going forward the next couple of weeks. So let's begin first with WXRogue.com, and I want to turn your attention to these maps. And for those of you that have been following the video content the last couple of weeks, I have actually periodically pointed these maps out. And one of the things we talked about just a few weeks ago is that these maps are meant to give you a probabilistic point of view. These dark colors that you see is not necessarily quantifying way above normal temperatures or to what degree will be above normal, but rather what is the probability that we will be above or below normal during a certain time frame. That's the key distinction. You see these colors and immediately you want to go, oh man, it's going to be hot. Not so fast. Be careful. This is saying probability. And the darker colors are corresponding to the highest chance of seeing above normal temperatures. See, that's the kicker. That's where this can get you. So, example number one of communication, right? This might be a little bit confusing when you first look at it, and you may be quick to jump to conclusions because we've all been baked into the idea that when you see darker blues or darker reds, that means warm or cold. Not in this context. And there's going to be a couple more examples that we go over tonight of things that I have not talked about with you folks. So, more on that later on. But this is a product we continue to post on WX Rogue, and it does have utility to it. These are produced by NOAA, and we are looking at, for example, the 6 to 10 day here in the short term, looking at pretty good probability chance of some above normal temperatures for a large swath of the United States. And if we go even beyond that to that 2-week time frame, especially as we get closer to the holidays, we see near normal temperatures looking likely for the Northeast and the Middle Atlantic, whereas out west in the Rockies and the Pacific Northwest seeing the highest chance of some above normals. The other misconception when you see this map, and especially for my folks who actively are, trading in this space or have stakeholding within nat gas especially, is they think, well, that means that winter's done and we're mild. No, not necessarily. And as a matter of fact, I continue to argue against that. Because for context, this is just in the immediate short term, and as we just mentioned, and as we've talked about, this is a probabilistic map. This is not, by any means, deterministic. We are only talking about the probability. There also is the probability of chance that it's not as above normal and is rather at or near normal. So be very careful with these products. Again, there is utility so long as there's context to it, but it can also be, in a way, misleading. So be very careful with that. If you have any questions on any of these maps, these are continuously updated throughout the day. Feel free to post those questions in the WX Rogue Discord. Now, if we then turn our attention to what we really want to talk about tonight, and what will lead off our discussion, is these charts. This is our population-weighted heating degree days. Folks, I hope you are taking full advantage of these charts. We also have a near-term point of view with the NAM, which only goes out a couple of days, but does help to refine the degree of which we see high or low heating degree days. So this is important too. But if you're looking for more of a longer range preview, well then here comes the GFS. Please, if you haven't already, utilize these maps, these charts. These are totally free to you. These are free to really anybody that's watching this video. If you're watching this video right now, you can access this website, even still today. That won't be the case, and I keep hinting at that, and some of you now are probably saying, oh, speaking of crying wolf, Brendan, you've been saying that for the last several weeks. Believe me, it is around the corner to where some of these products, as a matter of fact, the products you're looking at right now will be behind a paywall for folks. So take full advantage of it. Please do. A lot of useful information here while you can with that free advantage. If we look here at the population-weighted heating degree days, this is really taking into account more of your totals, right? Because we've stacked every single EIA region on top of each other, which helps to give you more of a total degree day vantage point. And one of the things that we've been hinting at really the last several days is right around this, December 9th to the 12th timeframe, which is where we are expecting to see another cold blast impacting the Midwest, apologize for the handwriting, and the Northeast. Right, so Central and Eastern United States. I keep saying that, right? Central and Eastern, Central and Eastern, Central and Eastern. Well, here it is. Right, this is our one of our next major cold blasts to move through the northern United States. But one thing to note here is while we do have really high total degree days expected, especially coming from the GFS, we're talking anywhere between right around that 100 to 110. This is pretty high in terms of your total degree days. Keep in mind the regions that's being impacted, right? We just mentioned, and we continue to say it's the northern United States, but take a look, for example, at, we'll even do west, south, central. Let's X out all of these here. West, south, central. Look at your heating degree days. I mean, we're talking like 6 to 8 max, not very high. This is an area, when we're talking west, south, central, we're talking about Texas, we're talking about Oklahoma, really the west, south, central United States relative to the EIA region. And this is an area that, again, is experiencing heating degree days, but not nearly as high. And that's because this really is, as I predicted, and as what's actually come to fruition quite well, a tale of two winters. The northern United States, once this is all said and done, my prediction still stands that when we look back at this winter, we will look at it as a mostly below normal temperature regime for the northern United States. But I don't think we can really say the same for the south, because La Nina climatologically tends to favor a colder regime for the northern United States and a warmer regime for the southern United States. What better product to really exemplify that thought than our good old climate models? This is what they serve the purpose of. Things like the CAN-SIPs as well as the CFS, excuse me, they serve the purpose of taking into account those climate historicals, but also based on what we're seeing now, project that out. So we're taking into account historical analogs, but also what we are currently feeding into it with respect to what we're observing in present time. So if we take a look here at the CAN-SIPs and we head on out to January of 2025, hey, look at that. CAN-SIPs is forecasting above normal temperatures for the south and mostly below normal temperatures for the north. This is the most stereotypical La Nina pattern you can get. I mean, it's as textbook as you can imagine. Northern United States favors more of those below normal temperatures throughout the month, whereas the south and the southwest remain above normal. Why is that? It's because if we have, essentially high pressure out in the west coast, our jet stream is going to ride over top of that, and it's going to come crashing down just like that. Okay, so it's going to cut right across the central United States and the eastern United States. Now, sometimes that can cut south too, and one of the things I forecasted for is for a major cold blast, at least one, to impact Texas and Oklahoma at some point this season. But it doesn't happen very often, right? Because all that cold air is going to kind of sag south. But remember, we're going to stay mostly warm across the south during that period because that jet stream isn't intersecting the region. It's not diving as far south. Not saying that it can happen, but traditionally, in terms of frequency, that cold air advection regime remains mostly confined to the northern United States. Now, if we take this model into February of 2025, CAN-SIPS still is showing even colder below normal temperature anomalies for the northern United States, but look at the south. No change, right? It's pretty much the same, mostly above normal. And so we can actually, compare and contrast this to another climate model in our suite, which is the CFS. So if we look at the CFS monthly, as I get stuffed up here on stream, you can see that, and actually let me go, so if we look here at January, a little bit of a contrast, right? So it is forecasting for, those below normals for the Northeast and the Midwest. Not so much to the extent of the plains, very warm out towards the West Coast. Keep in mind, I will say the CFS does tend to have a bit of a warm bias, so what I would expect to see is near to below normal actually extending further west, and then continue to see those above normals for the south. Now, the CFS does catch up on that idea by the time we get to February. Take a look at that. Pretty much in line with the CAN-SIPS, we have below normal temperatures for the northern United States and then above normal temperatures for the south. So pretty consistent with what we would expect, and also very much consistent with what we're seeing at least in the near term. So that will take us over to COD, and we'll go ahead and head on over to our climate models here. And we're going to look at the same one. It's going to be the CFS, except the difference is we're going to take this by sort of the next couple of weeks as opposed to month by month. So right now, we go forward in time. This is today, Tuesday, December 10th. And right now, at this present time, we have high pressure out in the West Coast. That is going to allow for that cold air to dive south across the central and eastern United States. We are going to see some of our coldest air of the season making its way to those regions. We could be talking about temperatures in the teens and even the 20s, low 20s as highs, especially as we get to later on this week. So certainly a good temperature blast moving through, or cold air blast, if you will, for the northern United States. And as we go forward in time, we'll play that out here. You see, look at that cold air. And by the way, a lot of folks in Energy Rogue were talking about this. Brian, phenomenal call out. He even mentioned, he said, look, I checked WX Rogue on Friday, and we were expecting the HDD spike, but man, did that pump when we got to Sunday. We saw a bit of a correction to where the models were actually uptrending the cold and showing it a little bit more worse than what the models were showing on Friday. So we certainly saw that play out on WXRogue.com. Another reason to check out the website and stay kind of in tune with it. It does update every single day, especially on days when the markets aren't open, Saturdays, Sundays, etc. So in case you're wondering, well, here it is, right? Our models are certainly really uptrending the cold air extent, and that's why that may be why we're seeing that kind of transcend into this week's trading. A little bit of a different trading week. This may have some role in that, along with some other factors. But as we go beyond, say, that Thursday, Friday, we do see a bit of a reprieve. So there is these, mild lulls that will take place across, the Middle Atlantic, the Northeast, and even parts of New England. But then watch what happens, folks. We see another cold air blast move through behind a cold front. That could bring actually some warmer temperatures, by the way, to the Midwest. So we could be talking about temperature normals, in some cases 20 degrees above normal, maybe even into the 50s for the Midwest. So the CFS isn't picking up on that. We'll talk more about that here in a moment. But it is, of course, followed by another cold air blast that will move through. But look at this continued just system after system after system. You're noticing a pattern here. we see a bit of a mild, reprieve, and then another cold blast, and then another cold blast, and then a major one behind that. And this takes us all the way into the beginning of January, which this is showing a major Arctic blast. This would actually be more of what we call a stratospheric warming event, which that leads to some of our major Arctic blasts where we're talking about negative temperatures, some of the more extreme cold events. We did see something similar to this last season, and I would even qualify that as the first 2 weeks of winter, and the only 2 weeks of winter that we saw. That was the beginning of January, and that was pretty much the season. But what I want to continue to underscore here is with the CFS and the two other products we just saw here on Tropical Tidbits, don't get so hung up on the colors, don't get so hung up on the magnitude, but rather the pattern, the pattern, the pattern, the pattern. That is prime real estate. And what I really want to convey tonight, and what I want to continue to stress, I certainly don't want to come off here like I'm, the guy from the movie 2012 that's telling you, the world's coming to an end and nobody listens to me, and then when the world ends, they say, man, he was right. I'm certainly not trying to be the crazy guy from 2012. But what I am trying to do is just continue to pound home the point that what I'm seeing here is much different to what we saw last year. Last year, why we saw so much mild temperature regime is because we had a pretty strong Pacific jet that kept pumping in mild air. And because of that, we didn't see a lot of high pressure ridging that was bringing down cold air. And as a matter of fact, that Pacific air was so strong that it actually kept a lot of our snowpack in what would have been the Canadian provinces at bay, if not non-existent through most of the year. So it was very much on par with a strong El Nino event, but it was also very unseasonably warm. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I had mentioned in my forecast last season, when I first joined Energy Rogue, I said, hey, Brian and Bill, look, this season reminds me a lot like 2016. 2015, 2016 El Nino, especially what we were seeing observed out in the Eastern Pacific with our sea surface temperatures, it all was eerily similar to that. And of course, we can't simplify forecast that much, but sometimes it's worth it because that can certainly have a connection, and it did. We saw a very mild winter. Now, the difference was, with my forecast back in last year, I was actually forecasting for a worse second half of winter because I was looking at 2016 and 2015 saying, hey, look, we had a slow start to winter, but man, once we get to January, I don't know, we could see the Northeast really begin to ramp up with snow and cold and all that, and just that didn't happen. So I am susceptible to being wrong, and that was the one thing I got wrong. I was right about the two halves of winter, but I thought that 2 weeks was going to extend much farther than what it ended up being, and it was a very anomalous winter. But what I'm seeing now is a lot different than what the models were showing last year. Remember, last year we were in a really strong El Nino. This year we are in a much more favorable environment, even better than what we saw the last couple La Niñas going back during COVID, to where now the models are showing repeated, repetitive cold air regimes scattered about over the next couple of weeks. We're not done. I mean, we are not done with the cold. We are far from it. Now, again, can't say the same for the South. South is looking pretty nice right now, at least for now. But for the northern United States, this is going to be a different winter. We're already seeing it happen. We've already seen the machine that is lake effect snow just outputting astronomically high amounts. So that's something that I want to really drive home here. And the last thing I want to talk about tonight is really pertaining to the GFS, and it's these temperature anomaly maps. This is a really great example. We talked in the very beginning of this video about how context is important with weather products. Well, this is another great example. If we look here at temperature anomalies, this is taking into account a above or below normal temperature regime based on 30-year climatological normals. Now, here's the key thing here. What you should really be looking out for on these maps is dark colors. Not so much the light. Look out for these dark blues or these really dark reds, oranges. what that's telling us is well above or well below. That kind of extreme is important. But if we're looking here at some of these lighter colors, well, this is still, it's not as below normal, but it's still really damn cold. It's 25 degrees, especially for Southern Illinois in this context, that we haven't really seen cold like that in what has been the last few years. That's still cold, right? That's a big change. And so if we play this through, this takes us, by the way, into Thursday of this week. Watch what happens as we go forward in time. Remember how we talked about that 15th, 16th, 17th range? Well, that's that low pressure system. The CFS really smoothed it out. But reality is this system's actually going to probably pump a lot of warm air north. And here it is. Actually, was that the system? No, it's not. I apologize. It was the 17th. There was one system here. So here's the first one, right? So we're slightly above normal. And that's pretty nice. 43 degrees, right, for Chicago. Yeah, that's basketball shorts weather, right? So as that system moves through, right, we get some warmer temperatures continuing. But look at that. Okay, this is interesting. Now we're talking about temperatures anywhere between, say, 56 to 59, even 60 in some spots in Illinois with this system. That's really, really impressive. And that's something that I want to make note of as a meteorologist. That's unseasonably warm. We're certainly not talking about heating degree days. Matter of fact, a pretty significant drop if we're just taking in the context of the GFS. But what I also know is that with this low pressure system, I mean, look, if we're talking about temperature normals that are 30 to 35 degrees above the normal, well, that tells me that we have a really strong warm front that's advecting a lot of warm air north. That's a lot of forcing in the atmosphere to bring that type of warm air north. But then subsequent to that, I also know that with a really strong warm front, it's got to come a really strong cold front, right? So as this passes through, you're going to look at this and go, oh man, winter is over. No. Don't let that fool you. Because as you play this forward, watch what happens. Well, that warm air moves east to the northeast, and they get to experience the above normals. But on our Chicago example, well, now we're back to 25 degrees, right? So look at that. Again, if we're just taking the GFS at face value for the 19th, which would be a week from now, we go from 51 degrees in northern Illinois to what would be, behind that cold front, 25. So we're talking about, a 20 plus degree temperature drop behind that cold front. And when you look at that map, you don't see any colors. You don't see any bright blues or bright reds. So you're probably initially thinking, well, Brendan, you said strong cold front. I don't see any blue on the map. It's because it's taking into account normals relative to the area you're assessing. That is the biggest miss on this map, and I think a lot of people get mixed up too. It's just like the probability map with NOAA. This is important because what you're also looking at is you need to see what's normal for this area. So 26 degrees is still cold, and relative to what has been the last few years of mediocre winter, that's really cold. So if we play this forward in time, right, we even see, if we take a look here at the Gulf, we see some cold air making its way down here behind that same cold front. And look, 32 degrees, 33, 34. That's really damn cold for the Gulf. We could be talking about, once again, some freezing temperatures for places as far south as the Gulf. But if we go forward into the 22nd of December, we see these light reds returning, but still, we're still talking about 27 degrees. We're not talking that much above normal here. So be very careful with these maps. Be very careful even with stuff that's posted on social media that, will look at a map and, they'll even highlight these really bright colors, especially what we saw on the 19th. They'll go, oh my goodness, look at that system. Winter's canceled. It's over. And there's no more winter, right? Context. The same fundamental principles we talk about here on these videos, it's no different than, the things you track when it comes down to price movement on nat gas. And the things that Brian and Bill talk about every single day, that even myself I can't, emulate because it's a totally different field. But it, both the parallel between the two is that context is so important. And the same thing can be said about weather. Maps are so easily accessible nowadays. There's so much free content out there that doesn't even require you to pay anything. This website's completely free. You can even copy and paste this and favorite it. I don't care, right? I mean, this is at your disposal. But many times there's so many different products and so many different models. There's just there's too much information to where it's not going to be useful unless if you know what you're looking for. So, with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you some context to the charts you see on WX Rogue. And one announcement that I'm going to pass by you guys is that for folks that are subscribed to Energy Rogue, and if you're not, head on over to energyrogue.com and get signed up for a subscription so that way you can access our Discord server and talk with both Brian and Bill, but also myself on the weather side. For those of you folks that aren't subscribed to Energy Rogue, I am going to be doing some office hours. We'll call it office hours. And so how it's going to work is I'll post an announcement in the Energy Rogue Discord server. What I will do is it's going to be in the evenings. So like I'll schedule a time and I'll post it on there where I'll basically be in the VC. You guys can join and we can talk about anything that's not discussed here in the videos. If there's something in particular that you want a little bit more of a dive on and more of a breakdown, if you want me to start pulling some data in real time and we can walk through some charts together, I'm happy to do that. We are continuing to build out, not the first iteration of WX Rogue, but we are actively building out the second update to WX Rogue. If there's something you want me to pull, I'd be happy to discuss that in office hours. Stay tuned for that announcement, and I am hoping to have those set up by this week. If we don't do them this week, I definitely expect to do them next week, but I'm definitely planning on doing at least one by the end of this work week. Thank you all so much for tuning in as always. Appreciate the support, and we will see you on the next weather video. Take care.